Hello, everyone. I'm Carley Marcelle, and I am a speaker, the host of this channel, a brand collaborator, the founder of the Matutine Experience Network, and your guide, a creative guide, so to speak, to our collective extraordinary potential. And today we have this channel is all about the impact that the age of disruption has on us, has on you as an individual, your organization, and the people in your life, and helping you to cope with, not only to cope with this uncertain new world, but to really learn how to thrive and to lead in it, because the truth is we're really going to need you to. This is the Thursday series live Reimagine Together, where I go live with a wide array of speakers every week, and we talk about what a thriving humanity future really looks like, and then the little steps that we can take today to bring about a better tomorrow. If this sort of content interests you, then I encourage you to subscribe to the channel and like the video, go ahead and share with people who you think would find these conversations valuable. If you are watching live, you can put your questions into the comments at any point in time, and I might bring them into the dialogue. If you're watching this in replay, please do put comments below about what you like, what you're gathering from this, and what content you would like to see more of. Today, we're talking about one of my favorite topics. There are a lot of topics I like, but this is one of my favorite ones, and that is the future of brands. And I bring you an incredible brand thought leader and the founder and CEO of a consulting company called Brand Trust. And we're going to talk about how brands are evolving, why it matters right now, and how to become more resilient in these climates by creating a brand that we can really trust. So I'm going to go ahead and bring Daryl in now. Hi, Daryl.
Hi, Carly. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm terrific, thanks.
Excellent. Do you mind giving us a little intro into who you are and what your journey has been and what you do now?
Sure. I'm Daryl Travis. I'm the founder and CEO of Brand Trust, which is a Chicago-based research and strategy consultancy. We work for many of the top brands in the world. We do work all over the world. We're known as a place you come for maybe more difficult brand challenges, because you could think about us as the intersection of marketing and social and behavioral science. So we can get into a customer's head and understand the things that maybe they can't or won't tell you. And so that helps, obviously, from a strategic perspective. Brand Trust has been around for 20 years or so. And before that, I owned an advertising agency and was in the advertising agency business for a long time. So that's kind of my journey. And it was pushed along by the need for greater insights to do better advertising, to do better marketing campaigns. And so the insights that deeper understanding of humans and what we refer to at Brand Trust as human truth is really what pushed the formation of Brand Trust.
Awesome. Thank you. And with that, let's go ahead and dive right into a very important let's set the context. How do you define a brand today?
That's a fabulous question. And for us, it's the question. We love to say that your brand is not part of your business. It is your business. And it's your business because it's the way we define a brand is a brand is really the promise that the organization makes to all of its stakeholders. And then promises that are made and kept are promises that create trust. And so brands are about trust, and trust is about making and keeping promises. And so the essence of the whole organization is really around the brand, because it's the promise that the brand makes. So it runs throughout the whole ecosystem of the organization. It's everything from the brand communications, the positioning, all the way through to the customer experience. And then underneath of that is the culture. The culture has to make the brand possible and enable the brand. So it's the whole aspect of a whole business.
And how many people in organizations, when you speak to brand this way, do you find that this is the common understanding of what brand means?
It's a mixed bag. I think there's more and more realization that brands are about feelings, not facts. and that we really need to understand how our brand makes our customers feel, how it makes our customers feel about themselves, and what's the emotional and psychological value that they receive from the brand. So there's a greater awareness of it, but there's still some old guard that's still thinks that the brand is the logo and just all the advertising and all that sort of thing. And obviously those are critical elements of creating a brand, but it's the whole sense that a customer gets from the organization and from the experience they have with the organization, not just the advertising and not just the logos and the color schemes and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. When I think of brand these days, I'm always like, brand is your heart. It feeds, it's the lifeblood. It is the heart of the organization, and you feel the heart at every single touch point.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great metaphor for it.
And right now, when you're looking at brands, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that you're noticing?
I think that, just all the things that are happening in such a transformative time in our culture. This was happening before COVID and before the racial crisis that we've experienced this year and in this crazy 2020 year.
Go 2020.
Yeah, but it's really all about authenticity, right? And about people are demanding that businesses have higher order purposes, that businesses exist for a reason beyond just selling stuff and a reason beyond just maybe their stock price and their quarterly results. And so businesses need to be more aware of why they exist and what their purpose is. And it has to be authentic, because people are just rejecting anything that's not authentic today.
Yeah.
So that's really the big transformation. And what we're seeing today is that we're not really creating brands nearly as much as we're creating bonds. Right? People need to feel some relationship, some relevance from the brand to them, right? And then they have to, that relevance has to be meaningful. And then of course the brand has to deliver so that someone can trust that the brand is going to actually do what it says it will do.
Great. And for your own personal, I get really interested in everyone's personal journey, what brings them to this sort of work. Because the kind of work that you do is what I like to call mission work, right? It's not just I'm solving a problem. It's truly something that you feel called to answer and to do. So what first drew you to branding generally, and especially kind of into this journey of defining brands?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love that question. First, I should say it's probably not fair to call it work.
Right?
Yeah, I might do it without getting paid for it, though I prefer to get paid for it, but I might do it without getting paid for it. But I knew really when I was 15 or 16 years old that I wanted to be in the advertising business. And truth be told, it's because I watched too much Bewitched.
I love that show.
Yeah, I liked it. It looked good. It looked like it was fun. And so, and I did well in my art classes and my English classes in school. So it seemed like that was an appropriate thing for me to do. But it was great. That's a great blessing to know that early in life what you want to do. And so everything that I did was based on that. And I started working in a television station, actually in television production, the same week I started college. And so I've been involved in this business, advertising, marketing, branding, really my whole life, and certainly my whole professional life, which I think is really an incredible, extraordinary blessing that I wish everybody could experience. But I spent a long time in advertising, making advertising, creating advertising. I've won a lot of one-show awards and Clio awards for the creative that I did in the agency that I own. And so what was interesting, though, is that sometimes we were maybe more interested in the creative than we were in the brand and the output of the brand. And the mantra then was, if you just create more advertising and you run more advertising, that you'll establish a brand. It's really all about this notion of awareness. Just create awareness and everything else will be taken care of. Have a larger budget, you'll have a stronger brand. And there's some truth to that, of course, but we didn't have nearly as much regard for the experience of the brand. less regard for if the brand says something, it really needs to be true. That needs to be the experience of the brand. And so as that evolved and we really gained more awareness, and as the consumer evolved, as the culture
Yes.
evolved, we became more demanding, right? And we became saturated with advertising. And so we really began to say, I need to be a little bit more skeptical about what I hear in advertising, and I need to experience it firsthand before I am going to, invest any trust in this brand. And so branding became really important. And oddly enough, it's only been about 25 years since brand really emerged into its own realization. We were a bad boy creative agency. We did a lot of really provocative creative work because that's what you win awards with.
Right.
A lot of maybe sometimes questionable humor, but I'm not sure what it was doing for the brand. And so I sort of had a crisis of confidence and thinking about what my own agenda was. Brand was coming together in this new realization, and we had worked with some psychologists to try to understand the role of humor in advertising because we wanted to be better at that kind of work, and began to realize, boy, brands are about things that people can't always express. Their unarticulated needs and their feelings, right? And so that whole thing led sort of a convergence of understanding consumers at a deeper level. We might call it account planning on steroids, and the emergence of brand, the realization that it is the whole experience. It's the ecosystem, if you will, of the whole company and the whole brand that actually makes a great brand. And so that, fortunately, that's proven more and more true. And as social and behavioral science has emerged, we've really come to the realization that we were on the right track. We were doing the right thing. And that's why so many brands come to us for things that are more challenging, because they are deeper human truths. And those are the things that we're able to, through our research methodologies and our social science rigor and discipline, uncover and then help clients activate against that.
So
it's fun. It's just plain fun.
I'm sure. I know. That's why I love your comment before. It feels weird to call it work.
It does. Yes.
I always, I tell people, I'm like, I'm obsessed with my work. And they're like, well, that's not good, Carl. You got to separate and have a personal life. I'm like, oh, no, you don't understand. It doesn't always pay me. In fact, it rarely does.
If you love your work life and your personal life tend to be one and the same.
They become the same thing. Exactly.
It's okay. It's actually okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we look at, can we talk about this idea of human truth? Mm-hmm. How do you measure, like, how do you really look at human truth and its impact on branding? Like, I can see it kind of as a larger concept, but what does it look like in the work that you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. The science, and science is I love this. The current conversation about listen to the scientists. Science is a fallible discipline. That's what it's about, right? It's about fallacy, right? It's about scientific theory. And so science is settled science until somebody unsettles it. And so
right.
Takes it apart, because that's what science is about. Let's find the fallibility in the science. So it's interesting because there's been so much work done and thought given to the rationality of human behavior, right? And people try to understand, if we do this, then people will do that. And things are about cost and convenience and quality and all those kinds of rational things. But the overwhelming body of science just points to that that's not the way human beings make decisions. Human beings make decisions based on non-conscious motivations. We're just not fully aware of what motivates us. In fact, most of the science would suggest that better than 95% of our behavior is driven by non-conscious influences. So if we're not aware of it, we can't simply ask questions, right? Because then people struggle to answer it, and then you end up with them, sort of defaulting to what they think is the right answer, defaulting to rationalizations. That's why you get questions about price. You ask people about price, and there's only one right answer: cheaper.
Right.
But there's no leading brand that we know of in any category that is the low price brand in the category. So obviously we're choosing for other more intangible, intuitive, instinctive kinds of reasons, things that we feel something for the brand. We feel like that brand is going to do something more for us. So it's getting underneath that superficial stuff. That's where the human truth is. Like there's a big gap between what people say and what people do. And so what we're trying to do is to close that gap and to understand why people say one thing and do another. And if you understand why they're doing what they do, then you have amazing clarity about what the brand should do to come into alignment with that need, with that psychological and emotional need. And that's where great brands reside. We do a lot of pharmaceutical work, and one of our great clients at a big pharmaceutical company, and those guys are scientists in pharmaceutical. They need to be, and the science is really critical, really important. But she said, we sometimes tend to rely too much on the science and make the assumption that everybody will close the loop on the science. And she said, the truth of it is, if you wrap the clinical data in empathy, close the loop, right? Say, this is what the data says, and this is why it's important to you as a human being. That's when you create a magical brand. That's when you create a brand that people are drawn to, in many respects, irrationally, right? This is the brand I prefer. I can't tell you exactly why, but I know I prefer it because it feels right.
Right. So do you have the pharmaceutical company, kind of being one, but even just one example of an organization that can be nameless, but even that we can kind of see the journey of where there was the disconnect and, old story assumptions, and then how you kind of go into the human truth, what that looked like, and how things transformed, just so that we can see a tangible journey.
Yeah, maybe not so much an organization, but certainly a brand. We've done a lot of work on Craftsman hand tools, for example, the sort of legendary Sears brand, with the company that manufactured those tools. And we've discovered that the brand is, it has a lot of rational benefits. They're great tools. They have a lifetime guarantee on them, and all those things really matter. But when we really dig into it, the brand was not performing as well as they had hoped it would. And partly was because they were relying on some of those functional characteristics and some of the packaging of the deals that they were making available, that sort of thing. But we were able to help them realize that the reason Craftsman is such a strong brand. Now think about this for a moment. When we do emotional research, we ask people to close their eyes and actually visualize memories, taking them on regressions back into life, right? And so if you think about a big burly maintenance guy who works in a factory, and you ask him about his emotions and how he feels about tools, he's not going to respond, right? He's probably going to run you off.
He's probably going to say he doesn't feel anything.
Exactly. Yeah. All humans are making all their decisions based on how they feel. So we take them into these memories and we ask them about their first childhood memory. And they can go back and recount these most vivid memories in the garage or in the driveway with their dad or their big brother, whatever it is. And those memories are so formative in who they end up being as they grow up, because they were emotionally rewarded for being able to fix something, being able to make something, right? And it left what we call an emotional imprint or an emotional engram. And so what's fascinating, though, is you have these big burly guys in these depth interviews, these emotional inquiry interviews, and they can see the tool in their hand, and they might describe paint drops on it or scratches, and they can also see Craftsman. So what we know is that the brand is a legacy brand, right? And so it's about what that brand says about who you are as a human being and who you are as an individual, that you are capable, that you can do these things. So those tools are the most commoditized products you can imagine. They all have to be the same size. They all have to be identical. A 5/8" wrench is the same in every brand. Yet Craftsman has like a 60% market share, or did at this last time I checked. So even when it's in a very highly commoditized category, that feeling, that irrational sensibility is what makes the difference. And so they were able to do some repositioning things and to start to tell some different stories, and it gave the brand a nice boost.
Great.
And I can tell those stories like all day long.
I wish. Maybe I could do a story series just looking at that.
The big burly guys makes that one really interesting.
Yes. Well, it can be a hard argument, not argument, not that it needs to be an argument, but I find when you speak to brand in this way, as this deep feeling, right? A lot of leaders and people, we freak out because we can't measure that. And so we know that creatives, that we understand that there's truth to it, but we don't get it. Our rational brain can't fully understand it. And it's it's so interesting, whether it's the burly guy or whoever it is, how many people would say, I'm not making emotional decisions, right? Like that's no. Like I have met some people that just refuse to acknowledge that they have feelings and that their emotions are driving most of their behavior. And to a certain degree, sometimes they convince me. I'm like, oh my God, you're right. Like maybe you really don't have any. So let's see, as we look at, let's actually speak to that for a second. So when you speak to brand this way, what do you find that most leaders within organizations understand the work that you do and are willing to kind of entertain and that it's easy to have these conversations, or do you find that there's a lot of resistance?
Well, it's a pretty mixed bag, obviously. I mean, some people are still thinking about things just pretty much strictly what we would get in business school, right? Where we don't have we're having a great new realization, I think, about the human element in business. I think I think some of the tragedies of this year are causing us to really think about that more seriously and more intentionally than we ever have before. So it's changing, and I think it's changing quickly. But there are some aspects of it that get a little bit distorted for people, and I think makes it a little bit confusing, because when we talk about emotion, like I wrote a book called Emotional Branding, and then a few years later I wrote a book called How Does It Make You Feel? Because as the science progressed, we began to realize that not everything rises to the level of an emotion, right? So much of everything that we do is driven by a feeling or a sense, actually, almost like an impulse, right? This is bad, but it may not necessarily rise to a sense of trust or love or betrayal or those kinds of things. But what we know is, like, every brand there's some feeling underlying every brand. But if you think about something that's really utilitarian, like Amazon is an amazingly successful brand. It's a part of so many people's lives, and it makes life easier, right? But we don't see Amazon necessarily as a higher order purpose brand. It's a brand that makes life easier, makes me more capable in my life, because my life is too confused, it's too chaotic, it's sometimes out of control. And so Amazon helps me do that. So in that sense, it's definitely a higher order purpose, but it's not like a Todd's shoes or a Warby Parker that's giving glasses away, or that kind of a higher order, more emotional purpose. But there's a feeling there. There's
absolutely.
And it's true for every company and every brand. I don't care how utilitarian it is. And even in a business-to-business context, like sometimes this is the question that we get sometimes. Well, business is more rational. People make decisions just on price and product features and that sort of thing. And I always say to them, let me ask you something. Is when you're talking about a professional audience, is your livelihood, is your very identity, the way you make an income to care for your family, is that more emotional, or your toothpaste? Is your toothpaste more? Then no. I mean, actually, in a business-to-business context, the emotion's even stronger. It's even more powerful. It's
absolutely
just in a slightly different context.
Absolutely. And I'll jump to actually one of the questions that I'm get really fascinated with, and that is, as you talk about legacy, right? Like big time Amazon brands, the Amazons to small business, to business, to solopreneurs, to everyday people who are freelancing and the gig economy. When we look at the individual, small business, and big brands, do you find that there's what are some of the differences? How are they the same? How are they different?
Well, certainly they're different in terms of mechanics and go-to-market strategies and things like that. But at the brand level, at the essence of a brand, they're not much different, right? So even all of us are branded, whether you like it or not, you're branded. We all have a brand, right? So if you were to go for a job interview, or if you were to make a pitch to a potential customer, you're going to, whatever story you tell them, whatever you leave them, when you leave the room and someone asks them who was there and they describe you, that's the story. That's your brand, right? So it's really pretty important to think about your story and pretty important to think about your brand, because you're branded. Everything is branded, because everything becomes a narrative in the human mind. Everything becomes a story, even if it's a 1-word story or a 5-word story. It becomes a story. So everything's branded, and this is one thing that a lot of smaller companies miss a huge opportunity to say, what's the story, right? What will people that I talk to say to other people about me? What will they say about me when I'm not in the room? Those are the things that make a big difference. And so that's really what branding is to understand what that narrative is, and then to try to make it as relevant and as aligned with their psychological and emotional needs as you can.
Yeah, definitely. It's a question of, is the brand unconscious or is it conscious? Right? When we think, it's like we're behaving, but are you kind of, and that it's an interesting dialogue too when it comes to differentiation, because sometimes we think that we need to differentiate for the customer.
Right.
So I would love to hear your perspective on this actually too. It's like I'm creating a brand for my customers. And I find, especially in today's age, that can be really dangerous, because you are, and your people have a certain identity, a story, a narrative. And if there's misalignment, if you're not authentic and you're creating for somebody else, then I feel like that misalignment shows up no matter how much you try to create for somebody else and engage. You're not truly being authentic. And what is the brand, the founder's brand, and the heart of the team? That differentiation, that is one way that we can really look at differentiating. It's almost coming more from the inside. But that's kind of what I've been playing with. What are your thoughts on if we're creating brands that come from here or for the customer?
Actually, I think there's two things can be true at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's both, truthfully, because I always do this, and my team at Brand Trust kind of makes fun of me because I'm always doing this. Where do these things align, right?
Yes.
So the best way to understand a brand, like we love this quote from Jack Dorsey at Twitter, that the best way to create a product or a brand is to tell a story from the customer, in the customer's shoes, understand things from the customer's perspective. So none of us exist without customers, right? So you could create a business that was the greatest fantasy you ever, your dream, right? But if nobody's interested in it, it's not going to last for very long. So it's this secret, right? So what is the truth about what I'm trying to accomplish that is beneficial and good for a customer, right? That's where the story really needs to intersect. And it's perfectly doable, because you didn't create a business with no customers in mind, right?
Right.
So it's to understand both. But you can't also just go figure out what customers want to hear and then make that your position or your brand story if it's not true. Because if it's not true, they'll know. I guarantee you they will know if it's not true. The brain is really good at that, right? And so that's part of what we were doing back in the old advertising days, right? We would just figure out what the customer most wanted to hear, and we would make those ads with complete disregard for whether it was actually going to happen,
right?
True or not,
right?
So we were just trying to get people to notice our advertising, right, and create awareness around it. So it's that intersection of the two and the authenticity of it, right? It has to be real. It has to be true.
Great. The age of disruption, our current climate, which is just getting started, in my opinion.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on how brand is evolving and is going to need to evolve in this climate? When we look at markets being disrupted quickly, people changing, uncertain. Talk about the psychology of people changing rapidly right now.
Yeah, it's it's a really crazy phenomenon. But you're right. I mean, don't unbuckle your seatbelt because it's only going to accelerate. But even going through COVID, so we did a really significant study of our own on emotional inquiry study of consumers and what they're going through with COVID. And we really just wanted to know in a broad sense what's happening. And there was all these things about, there are no boundaries, there are no truths. We don't know when this is going to be over. We don't, it's just really almost complete disorientation. And so everybody's scrambling. We've all scrambled to try to figure out how to cope with it. But the last question on the probes on these deep visualizations was around brand, because we're in the brand business. So we wanted to see if what COVID was doing to brands, and people literally would look at the researcher with an incredulous, almost disbelief, and say things like, I could care less about a brand right now. I'm just trying to find toilet paper. I don't care what brand it is, right? So if you think about Maslow's hierarchy, the essential needs that the things we need to survive, those things always come first. And when things calm down and things are a little bit more normal, then you start to think about self-actualization up at the top of his pyramid. So brands are going to have to be even more aware of that. What's the purpose? Why do we do this? Because the thing that people were saying to us as well in the research was that they were paying attention to brands they were really critically aware of the brands that were taking care of their people.
Yes.
Right? The brands that were, like supermarkets were mentioned many times, and some of the supermarket chains like Kroger, for example, they were mentioned because they felt like that the company was being thoughtful of their customers, that sort of thing. So those are the kinds of things that in times of change, those are going to be whipsawed. We're going to be balancing back and forth between those things all the time. But it doesn't diminish the importance of a brand, because a brand is shorthand for trust, right? I know this, I can trust it. So if I'm desperate and I need toilet paper, I'll take anything I can get. If the shelves are full, I'm going to take the brand I trust the most.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that brands have lost their relevancy. In fact, I think they're maybe more relevant now than ever.
And if we look at, I completely agree. And I actually think that brands can actually be your saving grace.
Yes.
Because as we move into disruption too, we've come from the product mastery age, right? Like toilet paper. Right. I sell toilet paper. Right. Your brand stands for more.
Right.
So when all of a sudden that we go into these crazy climates, you still exist. The feeling, the relationships, the trust,
absolutely,
the story is still there. So if that's strong, you can shift around, and maybe toilet paper doesn't matter anymore. You shift over into something else.
Yep.
And
I guarantee you that the first SKUs that were taken off the grocery shelves were the branded SKUs.
Mm.
So even at a point when you're desperate for anything, any kind of toilet paper, and you're stocking up, you still took the Charmin or the other known brands. You took them first.
Great. And when it comes to old stories that you think, in order for, actually, hold on, let me think about this. There's a better, bigger question first. When you if you were to reimagine brands at their best, really serving humanity, doing what they're supposed to do, as you said, kind of getting back to why a business exists in the first place, besides profit and serving shareholders. What do you see, or what would you like to see brands become in the future?
Well, I think, if you really want to see change, you really want the world to change in a positive way, you need to speak to power, right? And power is definitely in business. Business has the resources, business has the capabilities, the accountabilities, all the things that can create change and can create change in a negative way or a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's happening in our culture now, what's happening with the customer, with the consumer, is that brands are just going to be forced to be better companies. And there's nothing wrong with getting good for doing good. And it doesn't mean that there's no margin or there's no profit, because if there's no margin, there's no mission, right? We have to make money. But it's the motives, really, right? And it goes back to why companies exist. Companies, all of us need to care more about each other, right? And so if companies cared more about their customers and their people, then it would make all the difference in the world. Like, for example, one of the things that we're going to be focusing on very much at Brand Trust is that, because we do brand work and we do customer experience work and we do culture work.
Right.
We see them as all joined at the hip, right? And many times our projects end up longitudinally covering all that ground. But an awful lot of companies, clients that we come across, they'll do sometimes the hard work on the brand to identify the higher order purpose, and then skip to the customer experience part, because those are sort of the silos that they think about most dominantly. And the truth of it is, the culture, if you think about the brand as the plant, right, and the customer experience is the fruit that comes from the plant, the culture is the soil.
Yes.
It's the soil that all comes in. And if the soil is not fertile, and if the soil isn't right for the plant, nothing's going to succeed. It is an ecosystem. It is the best way to think about it. And so I think there's going to be a growing realization that a successful business is a good business.
Mm-hmm. I like to say the thriving humanity brands of the future.
Yeah. There's a lot of evidence of it. I mean, there's a lot of brands that are doing it and doing it well, like Warby Parker and Todd's and Southwest Airlines is an older brand that's always done that. They've done business differently, but they've been hugely successful because they care about their employees and their customers.
Right.
In the same way, and it's honest and genuine.
Right. And as you look at, you mentioned too, as customers evolve, and millennials especially, XYZ taking more and more consumer power. And, we've seen it with Uber. We've seen it with quite a few brands that I'm like, can't think of all the names right now. But essentially, when we see the internal practices fail or not serve people, there is a very fast shift away from brands that are not upholding certain ethical or taking care of their employees, taking care of customers in the way that our idealistic minds really want to see businesses do.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. A lot more.
One thing that you mentioned was differentiation, and that it's really interesting because I don't know off the top of my head what the link is, but you can go on YouTube, and somebody did a beautiful job. They took, I don't know, 25 or 30 commercials that were running right in the midst of COVID, and they edited them all together. Literally, the music and the words were almost identical. So it was like 30 different companies all saying the same thing. And there's also this issue of trying too hard.
Mm-hmm.
And saying one thing and doing another. And so that's one of the things that has been an amazing phenomenon, is that so they edit it all together, and it's like a 3-minute commercial out of 30 different companies. And it just goes together so seamlessly. And I've shared that with senior marketing people in big companies, and their jaw drops open. They're like, oh no, because they might be one of those companies in there. Right, so it's that. What is it that you, even if you're let's say you're a phone company, right, and you're a phone carrier, and it seems to be pretty commoditized. Or let's take Apple for a moment, right? Think about Apple. Apple's my favorite example of all of this kind of work, because always been about the democratization of technology. And everything that they do is around making technology simpler, easier, more elegant, more beautiful, but also not so much the product itself, but the experience, right? What's the experience of the product? And they just nail it on so many fronts. And so in a incredibly commoditized industry, or more than one industry, if you think about phones and computers and different bits of technology different aspects of technology that they're in, yet they've built the biggest, one of the largest, most successful companies in the history of the world. And seems to be a good company, right? Basically a good company, not doing too much, not getting into too much mischief and making too many wrong steps and that sort of thing. So it can be done, right? It can be done in any business because it feels like it's right. It feels, and I feel better because I paid more for an Apple laptop, right? Because there's something intangible about it.
Yes. Yes.
And that can be done in every industry.
Every industry, and individual, small business. Yep, right. Absolutely. So as we kind of embrace this idea of, creating brands that we can trust, and, we're all in different parts of that journey. Give a different, more, some organizations are more aware of this than others. What is a question? What's a small action that we can take today to help us to see our brand differently and to really be on the track of creating a brand that we can trust?
That's a great question. And it's a really simple, really straightforward answer. Just ask your customer, how does this make you feel? How does this make you feel? And I promise you, they can answer that. They can tell you, well, feels okay. Oh, I feel better. I feel smarter. I feel more capable. I feel like a very savvy shopper. I mean, it could be many things, right? But ultimately, it's how does it make them feel? If you go back to Amazon, Amazon is not one of those, like, it's not an Apple brand, right? It doesn't feel special, right? It feels more like a utilitarian kind of company, right? But it makes me feel more in control. Makes me feel like my life is not overwhelming me. It's a little easier, right? So it's got a really nice, but it's not I'm not smarter. I'm not prettier. I don't look richer. I'm not any of the kinds of things that you might think you might get from a brand, but you get something very important and very real from a brand that's even a very utilitarian brand. Great.
And maybe if that can even be mirrored back onto your employees, right? As we talk about these relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Being as brand being the lifeblood of all relationships.
Yes. Absolutely.
Asking employees.
Yeah. What difference are we making in the world?
Yeah.
How are we helping people have better lives?
Oh, I would love to hear those dialogues all the time.
Me too. I'm trying to provoke as many of them as I can.
I know, right? Thank you so much, Daryl. I think,
thank you.
Is there anything else that you would like to share as we close out here on brands that we can trust? We've covered some great territory, but anything else that comes to mind before we close?
The only thing that I would love to encourage businesses to think about, small businesses, medium, large, all businesses, is to think more intentionally about the brand, right? And to just realize that you're branded no matter what you do, no matter how you manage it. But how does your brand make your customer feel? Because if you understood that better, you could be a more successful company. You could deliver better for your customer, and you would grow better. You would grow faster. You'd be a better company, more profitable company. The brand matters. The brand really, really matters. And don't let anybody tell you it doesn't, and don't dismiss it. If you're particularly a CEO, you should really come to terms with what you can do with that brand, because you can really make your company more successful if you really pay attention to the brand.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Daryl, for
Thank you,
joining me on the show today.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go ahead and close us out. Thank you. Have a good week.
You too. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. This is Reimagine Together. We go live every Thursday at 11 a.m. with speakers who talk about what a thriving humanity future would look like and little steps that you can take today to bring about a better tomorrow. If you would like to learn more about the Machu Teen Network, you can go to our website, machuteennetwork.com. There will be experiences launching in the months to come that are going to help that help leaders to really consciously create this thriving humanity future. And you can sign up for the email list and you'll get regular updates on programming. Thank you all. Have a wonderful week and look forward to seeing you next week, which will be an episode called For Profit for Impact with the founder and CEO of nonprofit organization Humanity Rising. Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.